Karen blocked my driveway for weeks, so I sold her car without warning. Imagine waking up late for work, racing out the front door, only to find your driveway completely blocked. Not just once, not just twice, but for the third time in a single week. Karen's beat-up sedan is sitting right across the concrete, like a guard dog daring you to challenge her. The HOA president doesn't care. He shrugs and says she's just visiting family. Nothing we can do, but here's the truth. Karen lives across the street, and what looks like casual parking is actually her personal power game. What she doesn't realize is that her arrogance is about to cost her everything. At first, the neighborhood seemed perfect, quiet, tree-lined, families who waved when they passed. For a long time, life on that little cul-de-sac moved in peace. And the homeowner, let's call him David, believed he had finally found a place to rest after years of hard work. David's home wasn't the biggest on the street. It wasn't the fanciest either. But it was his, and every inch mattered. Most of all, the driveway. Working long shifts that often stretched late into the night, David relied on that strip of concrete. It wasn't just a place to park his car, it was a lifeline. A guarantee that when he came home bone-tired, his space would be waiting. For a while, that was the routine. Wake up, go to work, pull into his driveway at midnight, rest, repeat. Peaceful, predictable. But then Karen moved in. At first, neighbors thought she was just another homeowner settling down. But something about her energy made people tense. She wasn't friendly. She wasn't neighborly. She had a way of glaring if kids laughed too loudly, or if someone left a trash bin out an extra hour. And Karen didn't just move into the house across the street. She moved in with an attitude. David noticed her the first week she arrived because she parked her car in front of his driveway. Not in the middle of the street, not on her own curb. Directly in front of his driveway. He had to honk until she shuffled outside, muttering about how it's only temporary. It was supposed to be nothing. A one-time annoyance. But small cracks have a way of spreading fast. The neighborhood's HOA, the dreaded Homeowners Association, wasn't much help either. It was run by a handful of board members, most of whom were close with Karen right away. She brought them cookies at meetings. She joined their group chats. She laughed at their inside jokes. Suddenly, she wasn't just a new neighbor, she was part of the clique. That left people like David on the outside. And when you're on the outside of an HOA clique, every little thing you do becomes a violation. At first, it was small. A note about how his grass looked a little too high. A warning about leaving his trash bin near the curb for longer than 24 hours. Then came the fines. Ridiculous charges over paint colors and supposed rule infractions. But the driveway, that was the worst of it. Because the driveway wasn't just convenience. It was survival. David's job demanded reliability. Missing work wasn't just stressful, it could cost him his paycheck. And every time Karen's car sat across his driveway, she wasn't just being rude. She was threatening his ability to provide for himself. David tried to keep his cool. He tried to brush it off. Neighbors told him, don't make waves with the HOA. Just let it go. But deep down, he knew this wasn't going away. Because Karen wasn't careless. She was intentional. She smiled when he struggled. She laughed when he honked. And every single time, she leaned on her new friends in the HOA to back her up. The peaceful street David once loved was gone. And in its place grew a silent war, one driveway at a time. And yet, things were about to get much worse. At first, David thought Karen's parking habits were just inconsiderate. Maybe she was lazy. Maybe she just didn't think. He told himself it would pass. But weeks rolled into months, and the temporary stops across his driveway became routine. One morning, he caught her sliding her sedan into the same spot just as he was pulling out. David rolled down his window and tried to keep his voice calm. Karen, I really need you to stop parking here. It blocks me in. She smirked, tapped her steering wheel, and replied, relax. It's only for a little while, but a little while always stretched into hours. Sometimes overnight. The first time David went to the HOA, he expected backup. After all, wasn't that what the association was supposed to do, keep things fair? He filed a complaint, explained that his driveway was being blocked repeatedly, and asked them to intervene. The president, a smug man named Richard, didn't even look concerned. Technically, Richard said, "She's not parked in your driveway. She's in front of it." That falls under street parking, which the HOA doesn't regulate. David blinked in disbelief. So you're saying she can just block me whenever she wants? Richard shrugged. As long as it's not in writing as a violation, our hands are tied. Maybe you two should work it out neighbor dash to dash neighbor dot double quotes neighbor dash to dash neighbor dot right. That was like telling someone to reason with a hurricane dot. But if Richard and the HOA wouldn't handle it, David figured he'd at least be left alone. He was wrong. Days later, he found his very first violation notice taped to his door. Gross exceeds acceptable length. It read in bold letters, "A fine of $50." David stared at his lawn. It looked fine. No taller than anyone else's. In fact, Karen's grass was higher than his. Across the street, hers waved like a wild meadow. Yet no paper on her door. At first, David laughed it off. Maybe it was a mistake. But then came another notice. His trash bins were divisible from the street. Another $50 fine. Then a third, his house paint was fading. That fine came with a demand. Repaint the exterior within 30 days or face escalating charges. Compared to the peaceful neighbors who never seemed to get these notices, David was a target. And it wasn't hard to see why. Karen had burrowed into the HOA like a parasite, attending every meeting, whispering in every ear. She had influence. She had connections. And David. He had a stack of fines and a driveway he couldn't use. The unfairness gnawed at him. One night, he came home to find Karen's car sitting across his driveway again. He honked. Lights in nearby houses flicked on. Curtains twitched. Finally, Karen strolled out wearing slippers and holding a mug of tea. "Could you move your car?" David asked, his patience thinning. She sipped her drink. "You really need to chill? It's not that big of a deal. It is when I can't get into my own driveway." She tilted her head, smiling in that fake sweet way that always hid the sharpness underneath. You know, if you spent less time complaining, maybe the HOA wouldn't be so hard on you. David felt his jaw tighten. That wasn't just carelessness. That was a threat. And sure enough, the next day, another violation arrived, this time for a decorative wind chime that was too noisy. The HOA fined him $75. It was becoming clear. Karen wasn't just blocking his driveway out of laziness. She was baiting him. And every time he resisted, the HOA came down harder, protecting her, punishing him. The emotional toll started to add up. David began waking earlier just to see if his car was trapped. He left work nervous, wondering if he'd be blocked again. Friends stopped visiting, embarrassed to park near the circus that had become his street. One night, fed up, David called a towing service. He explained the situation, asked if they could remove the car blocking his driveway. The dispatcher's voice turned apologetic. "Sorry, sir. Your HOA has a rule against private towing. We'd need their authorization." David's stomach sank. The very people protecting Karen were the ones who had the power to stop her. And they weren't going to. It felt like being trapped in a game where the rules always shifted against him. Every path forward was blocked literally and figuratively, but David wasn't the type to surrender easily. Quietly, he started keeping track. Photos of Karen's car across his driveway. Screenshots of the violation notices. Dates, times, names of board members who dismissed his complaints. If Karen and the HOA wanted to play dirty, fine. He'd build his case, one piece at a time, because while they were busy abusing their little rules, David was learning something far more dangerous: patience. And patience, as Karen was about to learn, is the sharpest weapon of all. At first, David thought the fines were just a phase. Maybe if he stayed quiet, the board would lose interest. Maybe Karen would get bored of her game. But instead, things only grew worse, so much worse that the word misery didn't even begin to cover it. It began with timing. Somehow, Karen always knew the exact moment when David needed to leave for work or return home. On mornings when he had early shifts, her car was already blocking his driveway. At night, when he came back exhausted, her sedan sat like a barricade, forcing him to circle the block or park half a mile away. Neighbors noticed, of course. They saw David standing in the street, fists clenched, horn blaring, as Karen shuffled out slowly, sipping from her ever-present mug of tea. Sometimes she'd move her car right away. Other times, she'd just shrug and say, "I'll be gone in an hour." You can wait. The humiliation stung almost as much as the inconvenience. The HOA only made things worse. When David tried to confront them again, Richard, the smug president, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "We don't regulate street parking," he repeated like a broken record. But the smirk gave it away. He enjoyed this. He liked watching David squirm. Then came the threats. One day, a letter appeared on David's door, stamped with the HOAS seal. It claimed that if he continued to harass his neighbors with excessive complaints, he would face fines escalating into the hundreds. Harass his neighbors. David laughed bitterly when he read the words. He wasn't harassing anyone. He was the one being trapped in his own home. The spiral tightened. Another fine for a faded mailbox. Another for leaving garden tools visible. Each one stacked higher than the last. By the end of the month, David owed nearly $500 in ridiculous charges, but the money wasn't the worst of it. It was the feeling of being watched. Like every move he made was under a microscope. Like Karen and her clique were perched behind their blinds, waiting for the next chance to pounce. One Friday night, after a brutal 12-hour shift, David returned home only to find Karen's car parked diagonally across his driveway. Not just blocking him, but mocking him. The way it sat, tilted, daring him to react. He stormed across the street, pounding on her door. When Karen finally opened it, she wore the same smug smile she always did. "You can't keep doing this," David snapped. She leaned against the frame, crossing her arms. "Actually, I can. And you can't stop me. The board already said it's not a violation." Something inside David cracked. "If you don't move it right now, I'll have it towed." Karen's eyes lit up with amusement, as if she'd been waiting for that exact threat. "Go ahead," she said sweetly. "Call them. But remember, towing without board approval is against community rules. You'll be fined again, maybe even sued." And then she shut the door in his face. That night, David sat at his kitchen table staring at the stack of violation notices spread out like playing cards. His chest felt tight. His head pounded. Every path forward seemed blocked, just like his driveway. He knew he couldn't keep living like this. The stress was eating him alive. He barely slept. His work performance was slipping. Even friends stopped visiting because they didn't want to deal with the Karen situation. The worst part was the powerlessness. Every time he tried to fight back, the HOA tightened the noose. And every time he stayed quiet, Karen grew bolder. One afternoon, as he was taking photos of her car for his growing collection of evidence, Karen sauntered over and leaned on the hood. "You really like taking pictures, don't you?" she teased. David didn't answer. Karen tilted her head, smirking. "You know, if you don't like it here, you could always move. Nobody's stopping you. Nobody's stopping you." The words echoed in his skull long after she walked away, but moving wasn't an option. Why should he leave his home just because of her? Why should he surrender to a bully? No, he wouldn't move. He wouldn't give in. Instead, he began documenting everything more carefully. Not just photos of her car, but timestamps. Screenshots of text messages, copies of every violation. He built a file, thick and undeniable. Still, as the weeks dragged on, it felt like he was losing. The stress mounted, the unfairness grew sharper, and the HOAS smirks grew whiter. But David had something Karen didn't expect. Something she couldn't see. Patience. And patience, when paired with evidence, can flip the entire game. Karen thought she was untouchable. The HOA thought they had him cornered, but what they didn't know was David was about to find the one loophole that would bring it all crashing down. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning. David stepped outside, coffee in hand, and froze. Karen's car was there again, parked sideways across his driveway like a barricade. Rain pooled around its tires. His own car sat uselessly in the garage. For a moment, something inside him just went quiet. He wasn't even angry anymore. He was numb. He turned back inside, sat down at his kitchen table, and opened his laptop. Enough was enough. If the HOA wouldn't protect him, then maybe the law would. At first, he expected dead ends. He combed through county websites, local ordinances, property deeds. Line after line of boring legal text blurred across his screen, but then he found it. Buried in his property deed was a clause that made his heart race. His driveway wasn't part of the HOA's common jurisdiction at all. It was private property, fully and legally his. The HOA had no authority over it. None. And that wasn't even the best part. State law had something even sweeter. Any car left blocking private property without permission could be declared an abandoned vehicle. After the proper notice period, the owner had two choices: pay the costs to recover it, or watch it get sold at auction. David read the lines over and over, hardly believing his luck. He didn't need HOA approval to tow. He didn't need Richard's smug smile or Karen's fake excuses. The law was on his side. Then he remembered something else. Karen's car wasn't even properly registered. He'd overheard her bragging once about skipping paperwork to avoid fees. That meant her claim on the vehicle was weak. Piece by piece, it clicked into place. The driveway, the law, the loophole. For the first time in months, David smiled. A real smile? The kind that came from knowing the scales had finally tipped, but he didn't move right away. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, he kept collecting evidence. He kept logging every day her car sat across his driveway, every shrug, every smirk, because when the moment came, he wasn't just going to tow her car. He was going to take it so far out of her reach that Karen and the entire HOA would finally understand. And when that day arrived, they wouldn't see it coming. Not at all. David wakes before dawn, because some battles are won in the quiet hours. He moves like a man with a single plan. Coffee is gone cold beside the laptop. The file he has built sits open on the screen: photos, timestamps, the deed clause, the state rule about abandoned vehicles. It is all there, neat and undeniable. He calls the towing company he researched the night before. He speaks calmly, with the patience of someone who has practiced these sentences 100 times. I own the property at 37 Maple. A vehicle is blocking my driveway. I have the deed showing the driveway is private. I want you to remove it under the abandoned vehicle procedure. He reads the law aloud while the man on the other end types. There is a pause, then quiet. We can do it. We need signed authorization and a 19-day notice posted on the vehicle. David already expected that. He has the signed form ready. He has printed notices and a plan. At 9 a.m., David walks outside with a clipboard and the notice taped to his windshield. It is formal, unarguable. It tells the owner she has been given official notice for removal and sale if she does not claim the car within the stated period. He photographs the notice, then posts another copy on his front door for the HOA record. He texts Richard a copy, just so the board cannot pretend ignorance. Word travels fast on the street. A few neighbors poke their heads from behind curtains. They watch as David works with quiet focus. He is not yelling. He is not frantic. He is methodical, and that steadiness makes the scene worse for Karen. Karen storms out after lunch, hair wrapped in a towel, as if she had been caught in the middle of something. She glares at the notice, then at David. You cannot do that, she snaps, every syllable a challenge. I can, David says, voice steady. You have until the notice expires. You can claim the car and pay the storage and towing fees. Mostly, you can move it and avoid all this. I gave you the chance. She laughs like the insult is a joke. You think you can bully me with paper? She says. He does not answer. He waits. Days pass. Karen posts angry messages in the HOA chat and calls the president. Richard replies with the same smug lines. We are reviewing the matter. Please be civil. Avoid escalation. Meanwhile, the clock ticks. On the final day of the notice period, David is at work. He has arranged for the tow truck to arrive at midday when Karen tends to her errands and when most of the street is at their jobs. He wants no dramatic confrontation, just the law in motion. The truck pulls up quiet and efficient. Two men in reflective vests unload the wheel lift. They attach the chains, lift Karen's sedan, and drive it away. No dramatic scene. No roar. The car simply disappears. Karen sees them from her window and slams open her front door, shouting that they have no right. The driver holds up paperwork signed release. The notice, a photograph showing the car blocking a private driveway. Karen scrambles, her words spilling. Give me my car back. I will sue you all. She screams. Neighbors step onto their porches. Some record video with their phones. One neighbor calls the HOA. Another calls the police to report a dispute. Richard arrives in a polo shirt, hands in his pockets, trying to look authoritative. He demands the truck stop. The tow operator speaks softly and points to the signed forms. We were authorized by the property owner, he says. We followed procedure. Richard fumbles for answers. His smile slips. He stammers about technicalities and we need to investigate. He says it loudly, but no one believes him. Karen wails that the HOA will take action. She flails in the center of her own meltdown. She had expected support, not this. The tow company moves the car to an impound lot. David receives an invoice for towing and storage. He has prepared for that, too. He knows the law lets him recoup those costs from the eventual sale. He pays the fees with a calm that makes his hands steady when the HOA council tries to spin accusations. Days later, the impound posts the car for auction. The community whispers turn into gossip. People who had once smiled at Karen in the grocery store now avoid eye contact. Her calls to the HOA are returned with cool formality. Richard tries to summon loyalty, but the neighbors are tired of favoritism. Stories surface other people who had received strange fines, others who had been dismissed. The board's protective shield begins to crack. Meanwhile, Karen's outrage becomes desperation. She storms the impound lot in high heels, breathless, demanding proof that she is the owner. The lot manager shows the paperwork, the tow authorization, the notice posted to her car, the name on the title that does not match her temporary plates. Karen's voice breaks. She cannot produce a valid registration in her name. She has no proof that she had been diligent about the paperwork she once laughed about skipping. In the eyes of the impound and the auction house, that is the kind of gap that turns a claim into a losing fight. At auction, her car sells. The funds first pay the towing and storage fees, then the administrative costs. The remainder is sent to a state registry for unclaimed property paperwork David keeps copies of, tucked into his folder like trophies. He did not do this to hurt someone for sport. He did it to reclaim what was owed. His access, his dignity, his ability to come and go without humiliation. But the payoff tastes very much like victory. Karen's face when she learns the outcome is a study in disbelief. She stands on the sidewalk as strangers drive past in the car that used to announce her control. She had tried to make his life small. Instead, she lost the thing she thought made her untouchable. But the story is far from over. While the car is gone and Karen is humiliated, the HOA's reaction looms large. Richard has lost control of the narrative. The board must answer questions. Neighbors whisper about bias, favoritism, and whose rules matter. David knows the next steps are not about celebration. They are about justice on a broader scale. He has won a battle. The war for the neighborhood's soul is just beginning. The morning after Karen's car vanished, The neighborhood felt different, quieter, almost like a heavy storm had rolled through and left the air cleaner, fresher. But beneath that calm was tension, a buzz of gossip carried from porch to porch, whispered in driveways, traded over fences. Everyone wanted to know, had David really sold Karen's car? The truth came in fragments. One neighbor had seen the tow truck. Another swore they'd overheard Karen screaming on the phone, threatening to sue everyone. Someone else claimed to have read the statute David quoted. By noon, the story had already grown into legend. One man, one driveway, standing against Karen and the HOA. Karen, of course, did not stay quiet. She stormed through the neighborhood like a marching band of fury. She banged on doors, demanded support, accused David of theft. She even called the police again. But this time, the officers arrived with weary patience. They listened, took statements, then shrugged. "Ma'am, this was handled through proper channels," one officer told her. "If you've got an issue, it's civil. You'll need a lawyer." The words hit her like cold water. Civil, lawyer, money. Things she had never expected to spend on something she assumed the HOA would fix for her. Meanwhile, Richard tried to steady the board. He sent long emails filled with formal phrases. Ongoing review. Unfortunate situation. Temporary lapse in communication. But the neighbors were not buying it. For years, they had accepted petty fines, selective enforcement, the way Karen seemed untouchable. Now, with her downfall so public, those quiet resentments began to surface. At the next HOA meeting, held in the community center, the room buzzed with a different energy. People showed up who had not attended in years. Chairs filled quickly. Richard sat at the front table, flanked by the board, his tie a little too tight, his smile stretched thin. Karen burst in late, slamming her purse onto the table, demanding the board fix what David had done. She pointed at him across the room, her voice breaking. "He stole my car, and you let him." David sat calmly in the back row, a man with nothing left to prove. When Richard tried to rally, urging neighbors to focus on community harmony, a voice cut through from the crowd. "Where was that harmony when you fined me $200 for having my trash can out for an extra day?" One neighbor asked, "And where was it when you let Karen block my driveway last Christmas?" Another added. The floodgates opened. Story after story spilled out in fair fines, ignored complaints, favoritism that always seemed to protect the same few. The board, once smug and unshakable, sat frozen under the weight of collective anger. For the first time, Karen's allies stayed silent. No one rushed to defend her. No one dismissed the complaints. Then came the call that Richard had been dreading. "We demand a vote," a homeowner declared. "This board has failed us. It's time for new leadership." Murmurs turned into cheers. Hands shot up. The motion was carried. Elections were set. The old guard was cornered. Karen's face crumbled. She looked from neighbor to neighbor, waiting for anyone to back her. No one did. Even Richard avoided her eyes, his own survival now more important than their alliance. By the end of the meeting, the tide had turned completely. David did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply gathered his folder of documents and walked out, leaving behind a board in shambles and a neighbor stripped of her armor. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board fractured. Richard resigned for personal reasons. New elections brought in fairer leadership. Rules were reviewed. Selective enforcement ended. And Karen? She became a ghost of her former self, trudging past David's driveway every day on foot, her once prized car gone. Her influence shattered. Neighbors who once looked the other way now nodded respectfully at David. Some even thanked him, not for vengeance, but for reminding them that bullies only win when everyone else stays silent. The war was over. Justice had arrived, but one final note remained, a reflection on what it all meant. Standing in his driveway one quiet evening, David looked at the empty space where Karen's car had once sat like a permanent scar. For the first time in months, he could come and go freely, no barricades, no glares from across the street. just peace. He thought back to every late night he had spent trapped in his garage, every morning he had begged the HOA for help, every smug smile from Karen when she knew she had the board on her side. All of it seemed so heavy then, but now it was just a reminder that bullies only win when you let them. Karen's downfall hadn't come from shouting matches or desperate pleas. It came from patience, from documenting every slight, and from using her arrogance against her. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the HOA made her powerful. But in the end, it was her own stubbornness that cost her the very car she used to torment him and the HOA. They had learned, too. When the community found its voice, the board's power shrank overnight. Rules and fines no longer worked as weapons when neighbors stood together. David knew not every fight ended this cleanly, but this one did. And every time Karen trudged past on foot, the lesson echoed. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone's own pride drag them down. So, what about you? Have you ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA or a Karen who thought the rules didn't apply to her? Share your story in the comments. Who knows? Your nightmare might just be the next chapter in this series. And trust me, you'll want to hear what happened when another HOA tried to ban Christmas lights. That story, it's coming soon.